Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Friends of the Institute's presentation of Samuel Beckett Unborn with Rick Borutta. I'm Virginia Chen of the Friends of the Institute. The mission of the Friends is to facilitate community among those of us who are interested in Jungian ideas, who are inspired by them, and who value coming together to explore them further. To this end, we offer public programs on a broad range of topics related to culture and arts, examined from a Jungian perspective. If you'd like to join, I would urge you to look up Friends of this SF Jung Institute, and all that information will come up. And I think I'm going to move on now because we started a little late, but make sure you say SF Jung Institute because there are other Jung Institutes that have friends. Rick Borutta was a professional stage manager for 15 years in regional, touring, off-Broadway, and Broadway workshop productions, ending up as personal assistant and stage manager for actress Elaine Stritch, while creating Elaine Stritch at Liberty, which ran off-Broadway, in London's West End, and on the road, culminating with HBO documentary of the same name in which he appears. For CBS News, Rick produced one of the earliest network live streaming news programs called Backstage Live, which ran for over 2 years and also covered the Tony Awards. Following his interest in the Esalen Institute and personal development, Rick began studying astrology and the depth psychology of C.G. Jung, leading to his role as a counselor in astrological readings and making charts for hundreds of clients. This experience also unearthed his deep desire to write stories from dream work, inner guidance, active imagination, and memoir with an aim to give audiences a unique view into the transformative qualities of theater and storytelling. Rick has written and performed Nobody's Bitch, a solo show about his years as personal assistant to Elaine Stritch, to sold-out houses in California and New York. Samuel Beckett Unborn is also the title of Rick's first multi-character play. He was the public programs manager here at C.G. Jung Institute for 7 years.
Thank you, Virginia. So I was having lunch in December 2019 with Jungian analyst Tom Richardson from this institute, and we were getting to know each other. And when he learned that I have a theater background, the first thought that came into his mind to mention was that Samuel Beckett, who had written Waiting for Godot, had been to one of Jung's lectures, the Tavistock lectures in London. And immediately my intuition was screaming, it's a play, it's a play, it's a play. Now, I didn't know anything about Samuel Beckett. I didn't know anything about the Tavistock lectures. So I had to read up on this and see what was going on. So, what I learned is that Samuel Beckett was in analysis in London with Wilfred Bion, who was at that point a trainee. And Nina, I'm just going to ask you to make sure that the cursor is touching the PowerPoint so I can use the clicker.
There you go.
I think that worked.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, you did attend one of the lectures with Bion. And at that lecture, Jung talked about the dreams of a young girl that she had never been entirely born. Now, people have written about this event. They've written about Beckett's psychoanalysis with Wilfred Bion. People have given examples in Beckett's writing of characters that are unborn, and we'll look at some of those today. But no one has really explored what this girl meant to him psychologically, what beyond what author J.D. O'Hara calls scaffolding for his writing. J.D. O'Hara who wrote a book called Samuel Beckett's Hidden Drives, and he goes into Beckett's writing from a Freudian and a Jungian perspective, coins this term scaffolding in the sense that Samuel Beckett took lots of notes, prolific note taker, and so he was interested in psychology while he was in psychoanalysis, and incorporated that, even astrology, in his writing. So beyond what the unborn girl meant to him for his writing, I hope that during the discussion today we can imagine what she meant to him more personally, archetypally perhaps. Percy? There. Okay. So Samuel Beckett was born in Foxrock, near Dublin, Ireland, in 1906. He went to Trinity College, Dublin. Before 1946, he wrote poems, criticism, short stories, essays. He did translations for other people's works. There was one unpublished novel which was posthumously, and the novel Murphy, published in 1938, which he wrote while he was in psychoanalysis with Wilfred Bion. He became friends with the author James Joyce and the modernists in Paris. In 1946, Beckett begins to write in French. And his play, Waiting for Godot, first ran in Paris in the early 1950s, later went to London, and by 1956 was playing in London, Paris, and New York, making him famous worldwide. Later on, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. I cannot help that the success of Godot has been very largely due to the result of a misunderstanding, or various misunderstandings. Samuel Beckett wrote in a letter to Alan Schneider, who was an American collaborator on many of Samuel Beckett's works, plays, and film. When a neurotic complains that the world does not understand him, he is telling us in a word that he wants his mother. From C.G. Jung. Okay. So, C.G. Jung was born in Hesdale, Switzerland, 1875. His father was a pastor. His mother was reportedly psychic. He studied philosophy and medicine, settling on psychology after reading Sigmund Freud. He was considered Freud's heir apparent until Jung published Symbols of Transformation in 1912, differing from Freud's views on the psyche and the unconscious. In 1913, Jung begins what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, leading to the Red Book, which most of you, if you weren't familiar with Jung before the publication in 2009, you probably have heard of the Red Book. And Jung had written later in his biography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that the foundation of his life's work is all contained in the Red Book, the seeds of all of his ideas and concepts. Jungian institutes began forming and training in 1958. Okay, so the concepts from Jung that we will be working with today: archetypes, specifically the devouring mother and the unborn child in polarity with it. The concept of complexes, autonomous personalities from our shadow that are wrapped around an archetype. And when I'm talking about archetypes for people who are unfamiliar with Jung's work, I'm talking what Jung had defined as archetypes were pieces of what he called the collective unconscious pieces that were considered divine, so therefore humans couldn't see them directly, experience them directly, only their effects. And one of the ways we notice the presence of an archetype, according to Jung, is through our complexes, which are in our shadow, in our unconscious. And also the concept of holding the opposites. So a key component of Jungian psychology is when you hold the tension between the two opposites, in this case, the devouring mother and the unborn child, an unseen third way appears, arises. So we'll see if we can come up with some ideas for that for Beckett today. So Beckett was first exposed to Jung's work likely in 1930 with the publication of Transition, a literary journal, which Beckett contributed to and worked on with his Paris group of modernists. And the essay that Jung gave them permission to publish was called On the Relation of Analytical Psychology to Poetry. And he wrote, "It would never occur to an intelligent layman to mistake a pathological phenomenon for art, in spite of the undeniable fact that a work of art arises from much the same psychological conditions as a neurosis." And so I think we can assume that Beckett had at least read this essay of Jung's. Okay, so now holding the opposites between the unborn child and devouring mother. In writing to Jungian analyst John Beebe, he wrote me, "The devouring mother is a fascinating issue, and I think it can be linked with the unborn condition. Because in effect, the devouring mother is either not letting the child be born at all, or more interestingly, for more normal adults approaching midlife, will not let the person with the mother complex, who still has a tie with her, to be reborn." Okay, so unwittingly, without necessarily knowing Jung's work, Beckett was interested in the mother-child complexes. According to a childhood friend, Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, who, along with Beckett, traveled to London in 1933. Thompson to study psychoanalysis. In Ireland, psychotherapy was illegal with a government that was dominated by Catholic principles. So therefore, Beckett himself, to receive psychoanalysis at Jeffrey Thompson's suggestion, also had to travel to London. Beckett spent time in Thompson's psychiatric hospital with a man whose mother waited outside on the street all day between her permitted visiting times. The man wore boots that his mother gave him and instructed him to keep clean because they were new. So he wouldn't walk anywhere in them, only putting his feet up, waiting for his mother to arrive so that they could walk together. And Beckett spent time with this man in the hospital, talked with him, and included this image of the man holding his feet up with the back of his heels as not to tarnish the new boots his mother instructed him to keep clean. Okay, so Jung says, "The forward striving libido which rules the conscious mind of the son demands separation from the mother. But his childish longing for her prevents this by setting up a psychic resistance that manifests itself in all kinds of neurotic fears. It is to say, in general fear of life." Now, when Beckett entered psychoanalysis, he was experiencing a number of psychosomatic symptoms. He couldn't sleep at night unless his brother Frank slept in the bed with him. And on the occasion when Jeffrey Thompson suggested psychoanalysis, Beckett was walking on the streets in Dublin and froze. He could not physically move one step further until he could get a drink or two in him and make it to Thompson's office to be examined. In other cases, the fight in the West is a battle with the devouring mother because she absorbs the regressing libido and keeps it to herself. And so that he who sought rebirth finds only death. So in this passage, Jung is referencing a myth to amplify the visions of one of his patients that he wrote about. And so on an archetypal level, the unborn child is seeking a rebirth, which can be dangerous for the child, possibly because the father might get in the way, but also because the mother might not allow the child to allow this process to take place. She can be consuming. Mary Manning was a childhood friend of Beckett's and became a playwright and a critic. And in 1976, she was part of a 4-hour radio interview from Radio Ireland. And this is what she has to say about Beckett.
Mary Manning. He was always an introvert and always terribly shy and very, very devoted to his mother. Very devoted to her in a curious, detached way. It wasn't simply accepted her completely and adored her because he didn't. It was he was very critical of her, but he still was terribly
Terribly mother bound. I don't know what happened there, but we tested it. Terribly mother bound.
Mary Manning.
Okay. So Beckett's mother, May Rowe, came from an Anglo-Irish family in what was known as big house culture that lost prominence during her lifetime. So a family that lived in the big house would have been the manor house. They would have had tenant farmers and shopkeepers paying them rent for the land. In Ireland, this would have been a family sympathetic with British rule over Ireland, but this would be before the Civil War in 1921. And so her family had been one of these families with privilege and over generations through changes in export-import situations, possibly some bad decisions by family members, drinking and gambling and that sort of thing. The family house named Codrina was lost, and she had to take a job as a nurse. And while working as a nurse, she met Beckett's father, William. He was hospitalized, again, because psychotherapy at that time either didn't exist or was in its infancy and certainly not legal in Ireland. So he was sent to a hospital after having symptoms from being rejected in marriage by the family of a young girl he was in love with. She had agreed to marry him, the family said no, and he ended up in the hospital. And so May Beckett was his nurse. She nursed him back to health and married him. So we might imagine that part of her healing was giving him a piece of her psyche and her desires to regain some status, some prominence, some reputation, which he would give her. The price that she would pay for that would be to walk the halls at night, barefoot, rolling up the carpets so she could hear her feet on the floor. And but also yeah, and this is something that Beckett would record in footballs. Yes.
Sorry, just a
Yes, yes.
Did Beckett's father fall in love with a young woman that was different than May, who the family rejected him, and then she came later, or is she the same woman that he usually?
I mean, that's an interesting. So what's being asked is was the woman that William Beckett fell in love with the same type of person as May Beckett, the woman that he married? All I know is that that woman's family felt that he was beneath their daughter.
Okay.
And so they wanted higher for her. May was on her way down and wanted higher for herself.
Oh.
Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. So and in the short play Footfalls, that's the scaffolding is the character walking floors. Okay, so this is Beckett's mother's Codrina. This is the house that Beckett was born in. And it's a Tudor revival house that still exists. And so you can see it's not too shabby for somebody who was rejected for not being good enough for the other lead. But the extensive gardens were there at the time. It was probably a tense garden in Beckett's lifetime. And Beckett has written about this house in his work as well. Samuel Beckett adored his mother. He attempted to please her, going to teach classes at Trinity College Dublin and elsewhere to help give him a steady income, to support her idea of what a good living would look like. Those things, those reputation and position were important to her. And the father conformed, of course. He became a successful, what we would now call property developer in the Dublin area. The brother joined the family business, Beckett's older brother, Frank, and they both died early. So I'm definitely curious about the energy of the devouring mother with the father and the brother. The father died in his 60s, the brother died in his 50s. May Beckett lived into her mid-70s. But Beckett could not abide teaching. The trickster in him sabotaged his teaching career. He delivered a presentation at Trinity College inventing a literary movement led by a fictitious French person. And he invented the history and the background and how this character's literary work was rediscovered. And this did not go over well at Trinity College. And Beckett retreated to Germany and retired, quit remotely during the leave of absence, which made him all the more dependent on his mother. And then the father dies, and later after that, psychoanalysis with Bion. So in the play Footfalls, 1976, this is actress Billie Whitelaw originating the role. Beckett directed as well as wrote the play. And here is her quip from working on the play with Beckett.
Only once, and it was to do with this play, Footfalls, have I asked him what, a direct question, and I just said to him, am I dead? And he thought for a bit and he said, well, let's say you're not quite there.
They're not quite there. This is from the play Endgame. We're not beginning to mean something. Okay, Tavistock lecture. What Beckett wrote. I dined one evening with Bion and went on to hear Jung at the Institute of Psychological Medicine. He let fall some remarkable things, but I should think in the end less than the dirt under Freud's nails. I can't imagine his curing a fly of neurosis, and yet he is said to have actually cured cases of schizophrenia. He insists on patients having their horoscopes cast. And that's from Beckett's letters that he wrote to his friend, the Irish poet Thomas McGreevy, shortly after the lecture. Recently, I saw the case, this is what Jung said during the Tavistock lecture. Recently, I saw the case of a little girl of 10 who had some most amazing mythological dreams. Her father consulted me about these dreams. I could not tell him what I thought because they contained an uncanny prognosis. This little girl died a year later of an infectious disease. She had never been born entirely. Wow. Mm. 20 years later, after the success of Waiting for Godot, Beckett is invited by the BBC to write a radio play, which he titled All That Fall. I remembered his telling us the story of a little girl, very strange and unhappy in her ways, and how he treated her unsuccessfully over a period of years, and was finally obliged to give up the case. He could find nothing wrong with her, he said. The only thing wrong with her, as far as he could see, was that she was dying. And she did in fact die, shortly after he had washed his hands of her.
Is it time?
Well, what's so wonderful about that? No, it was just something he said, and the way he said it, that had haunted me ever since. So the lecture was in October of 1935. Lucia Joyce, the daughter of James Joyce, whom Beckett was close to, had been diagnosed as a schizophrenic by Jung in 1934. He didn't see her for very long. He saw her a couple of times, made the diagnosis, recommended her to the Bergolzi Clinic Hospital. All that fall was written in 1956. So I am guessing that Beckett took notes during that Tavistock lectures. Those notebooks have not surfaced. They either are in private hands or they were destroyed. Beckett does also indicate to his biographer, James Knowlton, that he took notes during psychoanalysis, but again, those notebooks have not surfaced in any way. But this play, All That Fall, recalls a number of details from the lecture, including the scene where there's a train coming to the station, the child who is killed, and the artist's complexes. So Beckett also, I think we're going to get that to the next slide, but Beckett also did hear Jung repeat his discussion of complex and artists during this Tavistock lecture. So Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, once again, childhood friend of Samuel Beckett's, became a psychoanalyst, was also interviewed by Radio Island in 1976, and here is what he has to say.
We also went on one occasion to hear Jung, the Carl Gustav Jung, the Zurich hands. And I remember Sam being very struck by a remark Jung was describing a patient with his young girl. And Jung had rather a dramatic and impressive way of speaking. And when he described this girl, he paused for a moment and then he said, of course, the truth of the matter is, so I realized afterwards, this young girl had never really been born. And Sam has often quoted that remark back to me. It impressed him very much. And I think that theme one can see in Sam's works. Of the person who is immobilized and hasn't really been born into the world. You could see that theme in a great many of his characters.
There are some notebooks that survive from Beckett's time in London, collectively known as the psychological notebooks from 1934 to 1935. And Beckett notes a handful of books and papers that he read, including Karen Steffen, The Wish to Fall Ill, R.S. Woodward, Contemporary Schools of Psychology, which includes a very brief summary of Jungian psychology, papers on psychology from Ernest Jones, whom Beckett nicknamed Erogenous Jones, a Freudian one. And in those papers, Beckett takes more notes on symbolic thinking and association versus apperception, and does include Jung and Silber as people he feels are at the leading edge of ideas on symbolic thinking and symbolism in psyche. However, I think the notes also indicate that Beckett is biased against symbolic association based on what he has read in these papers, in the sense that that symbolic association seems to have largely been connected to being in the unconscious and not striving towards becoming conscious, which Beckett feels a perception, getting to know something at the level you're able to know it, would have been superior to him than symbolic association. He also read Psychoanalysis and Suggestion Therapy by Wilhelm Steckel, The Neurotic Constitution by Alfred Adler, and With Trauma of Birth by Otto Rank. So the notebooks reveal a focus on sexuality, neurosis, birth trauma, intrauterine memories, and he seems to prefer Freud's ideas, while there seems to be no understanding or exposure to Jung other than what I mentioned from the Woodworth book. He does understand complexes, he does understand archetypes, as well as the concept of the devouring mother. And in his work, as various people have mentioned, Loy, Happy Days, Footballs, etc., these symbols are included in the stories. So these are the copies of what Beckett wrote, copied from the Trauma of Birth, Otto Rank. And I'll just read a couple of things, well, maybe just one thing. Anxiety of a child left alone in a dark room due to his unconscious being reminded or inert of intrauterine situation terminated by frightening sevens of the mother. Hysterical paralysis, inhibiting the functions of walking and moving by more than physically materialized agoraphobia, which immobility brings to realization at the same time. Pleasurable primal situation with the horror of being free from it. So this is about birth and also the idea that whenever there is proximity to the vagina, there's pleasure, but also danger. I think there's a mention of vaginal dentata in that second paragraph. Just to give us an example of the level of language he was reading in 1933, 34. And so we can imagine Beckett bringing these topics to discussion with Beyond in analysis. Beckett does say that he remembers being in the womb. He remembers feeling cramped. He remembers thinking he wants to get out and nobody can hear him. Beyond attempted to discourage Beckett from visiting his mother in Dublin. His psychosomatic symptoms always returned whenever he did. So, and as I mentioned before, well, actually, this is about Beyond. So Beyond's analysis notes were either destroyed by Beyond, or they were destroyed during the bombings of London in World War II. There's no record of their time together, other than some people have suggested that in the publication of Beyond's early papers, such as attacks on linking, there might be snippets of Beckett in there, and I think some of the couple of other pieces as well. So Beyond invited Beckett to dinner before going to Jung's lecture, which would have been as against protocol as it is today. So one wonders, why did Beyond feel the need to do that? During the lecture, Jung repeated his discourse on artists and complexes, which Beckett had likely read. I hold that our personal unconscious, as well as the collective unconscious, consists of an indefinite, because unknown, number of complexes or fragmentary personalities. This is from the Tagstock lectures that Beckett attended. This idea explains a lot. It explains, for instance, the simple fact that a poet has the capacity to dramatize and personify his mental contents. When he creates a character on the stage or in his poem or drama or novel, he thinks it's merely a product of his imagination, but the character in a certain secret way has made itself. Any novelist or writer will deny that these characters have a psychological meaning, but as a matter of fact, you know as well as I do that they do. That that they have a psychological meaning. You know as well as I do that they have one. Therefore, you can read a writer's mind when you study the characters he creates. These are pages from Beckett's full-length novel Malloy, one of the first full-length pieces to be written in French. As I said, he began writing in French in 1946. On the left-facing side of these pages, he writes, "Hesitate, puis mourre," hesitates, then dies. And you can see that there aren't very many corrections and crossouts. No whole pieces being removed. So this was very much a stream of consciousness writing from Beckett. The way he described it, he called it the siege in the room. And I'm just going to read you the English translation of these pages, which is pretty much, you were able to understand Beckett's writing, exactly what is here. "And of myself, all my life, I think I had been going to my mother with the purpose of establishing our relations on a less precarious footing. And when I was with her, and I often succeeded, I left her without having done anything. And when I was no longer with her, I was again on my way to her, hoping to do better the next time. And when I appeared to give up and to busy myself with something else, or with nothing at all anymore, in reality, I was hatching my plans and seeking the way to her house. This is taking a queer turn. So even without this so-called imperative I impugn, it would have been difficult for me to stay in the forest, since I was forced to assume that my mother was not there. And yet it might have been better for me to try to stay. All these Murphys, Malloys, and Malones do not fool me. They have made me waste my time, suffer for nothing, speak of them when in order to stop speaking, I should have spoken of me. They never suffered my pains. Their pains are nothing compared to mine. A mere tittle of mine, the tittle I thought I could put from me in order to witness it." And that's from The Unnameable, which is the third in a trilogy of novels. Malloy was the first, Alone Dies was the second, The Unnameable was the third. He wrote Waiting for Godot in between the second and this one, The Unnameable. Okay, so Ian Miller is an author. He's a psychoanalyst in the United Kingdom, Great Britain. I can't remember if he's in Ireland or not, so I should probably say Great Britain. And he has two books, one more specifically on his thoughts on the analysis between Beckett and beyond, and another one that is more creative and playful, the one called Unminding and Being Minded. Beckett's repetitive telling of a traumatic vignette first appears in The End, 1946. Fusing memory and nature, he writes, "There was a strange light which follows from a day of persistent rain, when the sun comes out and the sky clears too late to be of any use. A small boy, stretching out his hands and looking up at the blue sky, asked his mother how such a thing was possible. 'Fuck off,' she said. The reader meets a repetition of this traumatic memory years later in Beckett's trilogy, where a variation reappears in Malone Dies. In concise form, Beckett writes, "I said the sky is further than you think, is it not, Mama? It was without malice. I was simply thinking of all the leaves that separated me from it." She replied to her son, "It is precisely as far away as it appears to be." She was right. but at the time I was aghast. For Beckett, within this literary series, a working through cauterizes the wound, but the scar remains. Its final movement is in company, written some 34 years after the end. Like a repetition of a personal pensum, that iteration reads, a small boy, you come out of Conley stores holding your mother's hand, looking up at the blue sky and then at your mother's face, and you break the silence, asking her if it is not in reality much more distant than it appears. The sky did. And so if you don't answer, you mentally reframe your question, looking up at her face again, and ask her if it does not appear much less distant than in reality it is. For some reason you could never fathom this question must have angered her exceedingly, for she shook off your little hand and made you a cutting retort you have never forgotten. I glimpsed the world I had to create in order to breathe. So in the collected works 9 by 1 Ion, Jung has a chapter called Concerning Rebirth, and he gives brief descriptions of 5 types of rebirth. The first one he calls metempsychosis, a reincarnation, a transmigration of souls, not necessarily continuing the personality, but definitely the karma. So something like, maybe where we commonly refer to reincarnation today and karma as carrying the karma, but we don't remember any of our past lives. Then under reincarnation, he says, when the human personality is believed to continue via memory, as in remembering who one was in a previous life. So maybe this could be the Dalai Lama, or maybe this could be such cases as you may remember a child in Great Britain who had memories of being burned to death, being in a plane crash, and the parents, they didn't make the child afraid of talking about these experiences. They took notes. They brought him to people to study in a gentle sort of way, and they were able to get enough information from this child to actually get the biographical data of an American pilot during World War II who was shot down, and connect all of this boy's memories to this person's life. When this boy did become a teenager, the memories did recede. He doesn't remember them today. He doesn't connect to that lifetime in any way. And he's just living the life he's in today. But maybe that is an example of what Jung was talking about here. The third rebirth called resurrection, the reestablishment of human existence after death. Either the body is resurrected or the corpus glorificationis, the subtle body, in a state of incorruptibility. And then what he calls renovatio, or rebirth, renewal or improvement brought about by magical means. The personalities, functions, or parts are subjected to healing, strengthening, or improvement. Also transmutation, such as Mary or Christ after death. Now, I mean, magical means could mean some type of a shamanic ritual. And then participation in the process of transformation. Taking part in a rite of transformation, such as a ceremony or a mass to receive grace. So here, you might have been thinking about the Catholic ceremony, where you receive a wafer and drink some wine. The wine and the wafer have been transmuted during the rite into the body and blood of Christ. And by ingesting the sacrament in that way, the participant is also transforming themselves. You see this also in the Daime ceremonies in South America with ayahuasca. the sacrament is which is from the vines and the leaves as tea, is ingested and it is sung to as a plant spirit, but also as the spirit of the Queen of the Forest and the spirit of the Son of the Christ energy, which would be the offspring of the Queen of the Forest. And that can also, in diamond ceremonies, produce a healing or some type of a transformation. So the question we come to now is, did Samuel Beckett experience a rebirth? And how might he have done that? Could 2 years of thrice weekly analysis contributed to a rebirth? Could his decision to move to Paris rather than live in Dublin near his mother have given him the space to be reborn? In 1938, he was literally stabbed next to his heart. The knife just missed his pericardium. It went into his lung. Could an event like that stimulate a rebirth? During most of World War II, 1940 to 1945, he was exiled in southern France because he was part of the French resistance. So was somehow being isolated from all things familiar, the environment for a rebirth. Does choosing to begin to write in French indicate a rebirth has occurred? His mother dies in 1948, shortly after he begins writing in French. So when the personal mother is no longer present, does that make space for her rebirth? And what about the success of Waiting for Godot? And suddenly, instead of chasing after people to be published, they're chasing him. I have always sensed that there was within me an assassinated being, assassinated before my birth. I needed to find this assassinated person again and try to give him new life. I once attended a lecture by Jung in which he spoke of one of his patients, a very young girl. After the lecture, as everyone was leaving, Jung stood silently. And then, as if he was speaking to himself, astonished by the discovery that he was making, he added in the most fundamental way, she had never been really born. I too have always had the sense of never having been born. This is from an interview Samuel Beckett gave to the French writer Charles Gillet in 1968. After World War II, Beckett, after he returns to Paris with his partner, Suzanne, the first thing he wants to do is get to see his mother. He knows that she is ill, Parkinson's disease. And so he gets to return to Dublin in 1946, and he stays with his mother for a few months. In Beckett's play, Perhaps Last Date, it gives his character a stormy revelation on a pier in Dublin. Beckett clarifies that this description was meant to mirror realizing his own inner stupidity while staying in his mother's house in 1945. Malloy and the others came to me the day I became aware of my own folly. Only then did I begin to write the things I feel. He added, I realized that my own way was in impoverishment, in lack of knowledge, and in taking away, in subtracting, rather than adding. So he's comparing himself to James Joyce, his former mentor. And he's saying he realized couldn't copy Joyce, he had to be Beckett. Which is a very Jungian thing to say. And so he realizes something about this unborn condition that he can write in that darkness, he can write in that constriction. Yes.
And these are 2 years before Waiting for Godot, right?
This is before he begins right before he begins writing in French, and yes, Waiting for Godot. and he's in his mother's house, you know, when the light bulb goes off or whatever it is that happens. But in the play, the dramatic equivalent is being out on the pier in the ocean in Dublin with a storm raging. That's how big it was for him, symbolically. Okay. So, of course, if you know me, you know I like to look at astrological charts and to see if the astrological chart indicates that a moment when Beckett might have had this dream, this vision. And I want to point us to the period. So Beckett was in his mother's house from roughly April to October of 1945. So he would have had the vision when, if you look at the red oval in the outer circle, that is a progressed new moon. During 1945, in the summer of 1945, when Beckett was at his mother's house, that would have been the end of a waning crescent moon, which would be the ending of a chapter, something that inviting Beckett's heart and soul to let something go, making space for when the new moon event occurs to receive new divine guidance, new inspiration. And so we're at the beginning of that inspiration, March 11, 1946, 2 days before Beckett reports that he has begun to write in French. We can also point to the fifth house, which is the house of creativity, the inner child. Beckett has the planet Mercury natally there, and the planet's Venus has just crossed into the fifth house at this point. So what we would be seeing here is a new style coming through with the Mercury, which represents the mental functions, thinking, writing, perceiving, witnessing, and the Venus would represent then the style, a new style. The purple marker, Neptune square Neptune, occurs around the time of age 40 for everybody. And Neptune would represent the archetypes of dreaming, poetry, connection to the spiritual, to the cosmos. And when the square happens, the way that you're tuning into your Neptune needs to make a course change. It's hitting a brick wall, and it's being invited to adapt. So this Neptune square, you see it on the left side of the chart in the 11th house, is telling the 8th house Neptune, you need to be more public. You need to revise the way that you connect to the larger group, then the 8th house, which is where it's 3 planets, including the natal Neptune, is Pluto in Gemini, the Neptune, which we think is in Cancer, and Jupiter in Gemini. So Gemini in the 8th house, that corresponds again to the mental, the writing, perceiving, listening, storytelling. And the 8th house would be the area of house of death, psychology, shamanism, the occult. So Beckett is learning to bring together his psychological point of view as the poet, as the writer, as indicated by that Neptune, the psychological being the 8th house as well as the Pluto, and then the Neptune square in 11th is inviting, be yourself within the group, but to get your work out into the group. Now the moon, indicated by the green arrow, so that's the transiting moon. So on May 11th, 2 days before Beckett reports he has begun to write in French, that moon is triggering the 8th house and it's hitting that Neptune. And astrologers look at this as a clear moment because that movement is moving very fast through the chart. So this indicates that he might have really decided on this date to start writing in French. That this was something he needed in addition to what he was already getting from 6 months to a year. Now, the transiting Pluto, which is at the top of the middle ring, top of the chart, it is coming close to the North lunar node in the 9th house. Now, the lunar nodes generally represent karma, the south node being the past, the north node being the healing tool for the future. And so it's not quite in conjunction with the north node in his midheaven at this point, but in a few years, when Waiting for Godot first gets produced, it's close enough to that node, and then when waiting, by the time that Pluto passes that north node in Leo, which would indicate fame and being welcomed by the public, being loved by the public in a big way, that Pluto will have crossed over that point, so that it would indicate if Beckett has done the interpersonal work, he will receive that Pluto gift of transformation of that persona, that reputation that the midheaven and 10th house Leo would represent. Okay, so thank you for today. Thank you again for persevering about beginning, and let's discuss what we think about Beckett and his rebirth. Yes, Robert.
So I was wondering if you could.
Oh, you turn it, make sure the mic is on.
Yeah.
Hit the button and see the red light. There's a button near the green tape.
All right. That's good.
I can do it too.
The slider,
Carol,
Put it down.
oh, there's three.
there's, right now. Sounds like it's on.
It's on.
It's on. I don't know if you said this, but you're talking about his transformation from his mother's house and he switches from writing in English to French. And I was just wondering, I just was thinking, well, so he's leaving his mother tongue.
It's what?
He's not writing in his mother tongue.
Yes.
Into French. And could you kind of elaborate more on what you see of that about that, what the meaning is for you in terms of that decision for him?
Well, so I didn't speak about it, but it was in one of the slides. Beckett says that the child needs to have a faithless eros in order to approach the mother archetypally in a safe way to have the rebirth experience. So, so by leaving Dublin behind and leaving English behind and moving to French, that's his faithless eros in action. Thanks.
Yes, we have a question from,
Yes,
we have a couple of questions.
great.
The first one is, do we have evidence that Jung read or was aware of Beckett's writing later in life?
That's a great question. I haven't looked for that. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. I can tell you that in Beckett's library, when he died, he had a copy of the Freud Jung Letters, Volume 1, but he had no other Jungian texts in his library, in Beckett's library. But as far as the flip side, I don't know what Jung knew or said about Beckett.
Okay, we have another question from Paul Fishman. Was Beckett himself aware, and if so, how do we know of how his work related to his psychological being, and in particular his mother complex? Did he know the struggle in his own life to be born?
That's a really great question. He would never directly link his work to his personal struggle with his mother complex. He would talk about the love between him and his mother as a savage loving. He would write in letters to his friends about difficulties with his mother. But he would never want, whenever anybody wrote to him saying, "What does this writing mean?" He would say, "Why focus on what it means? Why not just focus on what you see? The loss, the emptiness, the waiting. Is there anything that where we know that Beckett was aware that his complex was affecting his writing?" Well, that's why I put Jung's words there and Beckett's sort of denial and kind of like Jung isn't the dirt under Freud's nails comment, because there is nothing that says he agreed with Jung, but there definitely seems to indicate he didn't want to go there with Jung. Does that answer your question, Paul? And to friends and others, I haven't read anything that where he connected his mother complex to his work. Yes, Darius.
Yeah, I was wondering about Beckett's feelings towards Bion, his own analyst, and you know, Bion was a little bit more, my understanding was more in line with Melanie Klein.
Later, yes.
Oh, later.
Yes, after World War II.
Okay, but at least maybe more ideologically in line with Freud, right? Bion was more in line with the Freudian camp, even though Bion had some love for Jung, sometimes privately, because of the pressures and that kind of
Yes.
tribal. It was more tribal time, you know.
Yes, so the Psychoanalytic Institute in London was fairly new in the 1930s. So the person running it was a man named J.A. Hadley, I think. Hadley is the perhaps Hadley, or Hatfield. And so he was open to experimenting with different schools, which is why Jung came to lecture at that time. Beyond, we don't really have a sense that Beyond, I mean, somebody else may know more than I do, if Beyond was really deep Freudian at this point, or if he was also playing around with different schools. But definitely by when he's Melanie Klein's student and learning from her, and that's around World War II, then he moves really solidly in that direction.
Okay. I guess the Jungian me wants to consider that maybe Beckett had more love for Jung than he was willing to consciously admit, but that he might have had some tribal loyalties, or maybe Freud was more of the hip thing in the artist community at the time, so people were taking sides, and it was tribal there, you know.
Yeah, I guess it was tribal, and in fact, during those Tavistock lectures, at the start of the lecture Beckett was at, the person running the meeting that night said, "Look, you guys, we can't expect Jung to explain everything to a microscopic detail. There's not enough time. He's done all this work and research. You know, it's just you have to accept with grace that what he's talking about is something that is real. It's something he's studied, right? Would be like asking Albert Einstein to talk about why the electric cord hits the thing and makes noise, right? He would never waste his time doing that. So, yeah, there was a lot of that at the time. Personally, I like to think that Beckett enjoyed Jung more than he let on. We just don't know that. His plays, his books are full of symbols, plenty of the mother, plenty of the unborn child. And that's what helps us connect. It's what helps us respond to his work. So I like to think that he was aware of it beyond just what J.D. O'Hara called scaffolding.
I have a response from Paul Fishman. He said yes. That answers my question very well. Thank you, Rick. And here's a new question. Curious about the quote on the slide. Great quote. Interesting in interpretation of this, and also interested in the interpretation of this, and also how it might relate to Jung's theories of development.
The end is in the beginning, and yet you go on. So what is my interpretation of that in terms of Jung's theories? The first image that comes to mind is the idea that the archetype of the oak tree is imprinted in the seed, in the acorn. So in terms of our individuation path and our path in this life, we already have the instructions in some way, we already have the programming, and we have to keep going, keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I think Beckett definitely relates to that, the struggle of suffering and also putting one foot forward. Yes.
Do you think the aware and the unborn child are related concepts?
So for the Zoom room, the question is, do I think the puer and the unborn child are related to each other? Absolutely. I think if your unconscious self is aware of the constriction by the mother, you're trying to fly away. And so early on in life, as you're building your ego, you have a lot of that puer energy, right, to try and escape. Yeah. Yes.
So they just saw
Is it red? Yeah.
Yeah, so in one part there, you talked about the father and the brother,
Yes.
and going to work in a very archetypal way. And to me, it also meaning that there's a father complex at work. Were there other instances, because that's when unborn, of course. And were there other instances directly related to Beckett that would also illustrate the effect of father complex?
So the question was, is there any evidence in Beckett's work of the presence of the father complex? And I haven't read everything Beckett has written. What I have written so far, the father is minimally there, if there at all.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
When you were speaking about it, I felt this sort of sedative experience, like, and I saw a copy, and I looked up copy.
Yeah.
And it actually is about the unborn. It's never been bringing promise, and so a transition between states of existence. It's an archetype, power related to both sleep and the promise of new life. And so that just felt like there's been all of years. My whole thought practice about talking about that's what I felt.
You want to say that in front of the mic so the people see?
That's okay. I just wanted to express that experience. I was wondering if, because you talked about the oak tree just recently.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if coffee archetype, did that ever come in, the Persephone or?
Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't there be a feminine aspect of the unborn, let's say? Just not really just yeah, I like that. Yes, madam. Mhm. So the question is, did Jung write about intrauterine experiences? Does anybody want to answer that? Because I don't know the answer. Nobody's coming up with anything. Yeah.
I think it was more auto, auto rent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's James.
Oh. Beckett commented on Jung being interested in astrology.
Yes.
Did Beckett have his childhood?
I don't know. But he must have consulted an astrologer to write in the detail that he did in his novel Murphy, which includes a character having his horoscope drawn, and there are specific planets and angles and things like that in that novel.
Good call. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any more from the chat?
There are
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Robert.
That's her Borutta.
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering, I'm not really familiar with Beckett's plays like that, but is it, I think it's not a stretch to guess that maybe they would be not heroic tales. I'm just wondering, I'm wondering with Beckett, so he's kind of teaching us unborn kind of state, right? That's really, and it somehow resonated with a bunch of people, right? I mean, I think that, do you have any sense about how his kind of own development intersected with kind of the zeitgeist that would lead to him being so popular?
I mean, I haven't read a lot of those analyses of Beckett and the zeitgeist, and what intersected. Obviously, we're coming out of World War II, so the experience of waiting, not having certain things. Certainly, when Beckett writes about violence being inflicted upon a character, that's a direct reference politically to fascism in Europe from World War II, and people being taken and beaten, starved, etc., etc. Yes.
Yes, I guess World War would be a symbol of the devouring mother.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So after Beckett realized the rebirth, did he undergo kind of rebirth or transformation, and how did it look like it, and how did it affect his work on it?
Well, I mean, based on what I share with you, do you think any of the events that we talked about today might have initiated some kind of a rebirth, maybe more than maybe in different times than the one I talked about?
So yeah, but I'm thinking more specifically in terms of like how Jung expression were like that.
Right. Did he go attend a mass, or did he attend a shamanic ceremony? I don't know that Beckett ever did any
Or
of
what
that.
about like individuation? Like something more internal.
I absolutely believe Beckett had that, because as a writer, he's listening to these voices, he's making those, filling up those notebooks that I showed you, writing furiously for a good decade before that calms down, and then there's not so much for him to write anymore. So that after that period, the stories become shorter, and he's even more interested in his writing as little as possible, to the point when in 1968 he contributed a piece to the review called Oh Calcutta that was called Breath, and there were no actors and there was no dialogue for 35 seconds. Yes, Derek.
I'm wondering if maybe his experience of studying the French resistance, going to fight, and the experience of brushing up close to death can be an individuating male initiation type experience that often requires separation from the mother psychologically.
I think so. I think why not? And if you read his novel Watt, which he wrote in France, he began it, wrote most of it while in exile in France. I think you can see these psychotic images that are in his mind, he's trying to work through, that would indicate that he wants this rebirth so bad. Yeah. Yes, from the chat room.
Yes. A question from Linda Lazzaretti. Why was Waiting for Godot so successful?
Yeah, again, this is back to the zeitgeist. What was so attractive about these two characters on a bare stage with a spindly tree and a rock? Well, so I think when Beckett wrote Waiting for Godot, he was needing a bit of a break from the trilogy. So that furious writing in those notebooks, very heavy. So he didn't want to lose momentum, but I also think he wanted to experiment a little bit. So these tramp costumes, right? The mismatched vest, the ill-fitting pants, the bowler hats, that's directly from the silent films of the 1920s and 30s. Beckett loved those films. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton. So he loved the slapstick. So he put in a moment in Waiting for Godot where the characters are switching hats and stacking hats and who gets what, and that's, you can look this up on YouTube. So the people who love Waiting for Godot have seen these films. They're definitely recognizing something from popular culture. It's not just about waiting and loving and nothing happening to us, as one of the reviews said. Yes.
Actually, it's a comment, I think, rather than a question. Maybe it's a question, but it's Marla Herbig. She says,
Yeah.
Waiting for Godot was so impactful for many of us. Would you please ponder this? So I think it's an elaboration of the previous question. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
The question elaboration. Yeah.
I think it's very powerful when you have this minimalism on stage. Two characters. Well, you have a pair. You have Vladimir and Estragon, the main characters. Then you have another pair. You have Pazzo and Lucky come in and out during each act once. And you have so Beckett is commenting on social issues, right? The character of Pazzo is a landowner, indicated by the way he dresses. Lucky is his slave that he's trying to sell and market. Lucky is led around the stage by a long rope and a noose. And then you have on top of that what the characters are waiting for, and these long pauses and repetitive movements on stage during the 2.5 hours that this play can take. So the audience is really sitting with something inside. Beckett, my opinion of this, I might have read this somewhere else, but I definitely carry it with me. Beckett loved art. He loved going to galleries and having what people call as an aesthetic experience. So this aesthetic experience is also connected to connecting to the mother, or working out mother. The experience of being one with the mother, having a pause from the libido that is trying to push the life forward, so you get a break during an aesthetic experience. And I think Beckett was attempting to, with Waiting for Godot, to give the audience a chance to have a pause within themselves, instead of trying to get to the next scene or the next line or the next bit of action.
Mm-hmm.
You heard it, folks. Or somebody could say, I copied that from somebody. That's true.
I was struck by your discussing Beckett memory of being inside the room in Freeburg on the path. Studying a lot of Danny Roth.
Yes.
And that's one of his major themes, which comes from psychedelic therapy.
So, one doesn't have to be psychedelic, psychedelic periods, it can be just an altered state of some sort. But my question is, there were a bunch of little upholds in France at the time who were thinking these messed up. You think that he was involved in any of that, and what part of France was he living in? I don't remember what part of Paris he was living in. I don't know that Beckett participated in any psychedelics. He was definitely a smoker. He definitely loved whiskey, Irish whiskey. But it's interesting that you bring up Stagroff's work and the pineal matrices, because if you look at the planet Saturn in Beckett's natal chart, it's in the 4th house. Which so Saturn would represent that constriction and that feeling of stuckness. And the 4th house would be the inner home. And the mother. But yes, very good. Okay. Any more from the chat?
Yes. This is Suzanne. I struggled with Waiting for Godot. What is a Jungian take on the main theme?
On the what theme? The main theme?
The main theme.
Well, I mean, I think there could be many Jungian takes. On the surface, you have these two pairs, which is again holding about the opposites. And then, of course, the 4 makes a quaternity, so that's the wholeness. A tree can be a symbol for the mother. Even the mound, the stone that Estragon sits on in the fetal position, that's a symbol for the mother. When the characters say, let's do our exercises, and they do tree pose, the tree pose is not the yoga tree pose like that. It's more of a Christ on the cross tree, like this, and that is specific in Beckett's notebooks. So just a few quick. Yes.
Just a comment about what you just said.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the tarot card, the hanging.
Yes.
And the very shape upside down, which of course has much to do with belief.
Yeah. So Jan's commented that position upside down is the Hanged Man tarot card, which represents waiting. Anybody else? Yes, Dave.
It's not personal. What kind of connections do you see in your own life with the archetype of the unborn child and development of it? If you thought about it at all?
Well, when you read the play, it was deeply personal. That's in the play, I give Beckett's mother some of the things that my mother said to me. So for the last 2 years, I have lived with these archetypes in me, and have looked at a lot of different things, revised different things as I've written the play. Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely about taking one step forward every day. Yeah. As a practice for rebirth, and also to align with the libido that wants to move forward, not go back into the monk. Sorry. Okay. I saw you first, then the chat, and then Robin.
Okay, so I'm just feeling this sense of not going back, but also waiting, and then having some sort of libido alignment.
Yes.
And it just seems like such a conscious act to be in that place.
Yeah.
And when you actually move forward with that libido, I will put words to it, and this can speak to us to imagine that.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's heroic work. I mean, somebody's mentioned the hero before. That's the hero's journey for an unborn personality to move forward. Yeah. Okay, Chapman.
Paul Fishman says, I took the liberty of asking AI for a joke on this subject. Apparently, there are two career paths for dealing with a mother complex. If you're like Samuel Beckett, you put your characters on stage, strip them of everything, trap them in a barren set, and make them wait endlessly, so the audience can feel what it was like growing up. If you go the route of Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung, you sit in a comfortable chair and charge other people to explain why they feel that way about their mothers. Same material, just depends on whether you'd rather have critics or patients.
Great, Paul. Thank you for that. That was great. Okay. And I'm going to ask Nina to save the chat for me so I get to keep these comments afterward. Thank you. Yes, Robin.
This is so layered and so rich, right? And you said that when you had lunch with John B, you didn't know much about Samuel Beckett. Is that right? And then were you stunned as you followed your inspiration, you followed something new that's so stark? Was it stunning for you that you are opening up? Can you say something about that?
Sure. So Robin asked me to talk about my journey connecting to these archetypes and from the point when I had lunch with Tom Richardson and he mentioned that Beckett had been at Jung's lecture. So, I mean, of course, at first I was surprised by how much I was interested in it, and then even more surprised when I realized I've never even seen Waiting for Godot. You know, I haven't read any of Beckett's work. And so in the early stages of reading and having ideas swirling around in my head, it was how did these three characters work together, Jung and Beckett. And then while bouncing some things off through emails with John Beebe is when the dyad of the devouring mother and the unborn child came forward. And then reading John's email made me realize, oh, this is my personal work. The reason I'm drawn to this is because this is my next step as I have to work with these archetypes in me. And so in that process involved all kinds of experiences, some with psychedelics, a lot of writing and journaling, definitely using astrology and dream work. And over time, after a period of 6 months of reading and working and taking notes, then the characters felt like they were ready to talk to me as Samuel Beckett and Jung and the girl and beyond. And so then I could start writing script, writing some scenes. And it is very much a process of active imagination for me. And I'm just taking notes while I watch them go at it with each other. Yeah. And that's that.
Thank you.
Sure. And I think Jung's right, it says that's what artists do. You know, we engage our complexes. And I think that's where our material comes. Yes, Robert.
Did you have the experience where times the complexes were saying and doing things that you didn't want? Like you're writing, you're like, wait a minute, I don't want that.
I don't want them to do that. I mean, I think I try very much to be open and just take dictation, like I'm observant. And certainly I think at some point the structure of the story dictates what gets left in and what gets taken out. So at the beginning, I'm not editing anything, I'm not saying no, but later on, it's like, oh, that's not really connected to the armature of the story, so we're gonna let that go. I will share an experience. Yes, we'll get to the chat room in a second. I will share an experience I had at around 2 a.m. I was woken up by my upstairs neighbor walking on the floor, and really did not want to be woken up. I was very upset, but as I'm trying to go back to sleep, it felt like Beckett was near me and showing me him walking, pacing the floor. So I had to get out of bed and go to the computer at 2 in the morning and write that. And that's in the play. Yeah. Okay, 1 second, James. Yes, Chapman.
From Suzanne,
Yes.
is your play planned for production or still in process?
It's in process. I'm looking for producers, submitting it to festivals, etc. So nothing at the moment, but definitely email me if you want to keep in touch about that, and I will update you. Thank you. Yes, James.
This might be a personal question, but I'm quite sure. So how does your chart relate to Beckett's chart? Did you do that?
I did do that, and it's on my Substack actually. I showed this, I think. Planets in my chart and planets in his chart make a Merkaba symbol. So I have a trine and he has a trine opposing each other.
This is the natal chart?
Yeah, the 2 natal charts, yeah.
So, what does that mean for?
Well, both the above and the below merging in the center. So trines are 3 planets in the natal chart that the energies flow freely between them. It's neither good nor bad, it's just uninhibited. So it's strong. And so when you bring the 2 together, in other words, in his chart, it becomes a triangle in my chart going the opposite way of the triangle in my chart going this way. So you would do that when you look at the relationship between 2 people, as you put one person's chart over the others. So that's where you see that symbol. Another synchronicity is that you go back. If
Let me.
the clicker, yeah, there we go. The progressed new moon configuration in Beckett's chart, which is that red oval. When I started this project, I was going through a progressed new moon, but in the 10th house area. So not quite in the 8th. But I also have Pluto in the 8th, as Beckett does. So there's just two quick connections there. But my Substack has that information in detail. Yes, Chad.
We're going to try Karen on audio actually. Karen, if you can speak now, let's see.
Okay, hi Karen.
Let me see. Karen, are you able to ask your question?
Hey,
Okay.
Rick,
Hi Sam, hi Karen.
wonderful talk.
Thanks.
I guess one of the 2 things, in terms of the primordial stuff that Bion was also interested in lifelong, in the Brazilian seminars, he was said, this primordial mind I can pictorialize by taking a model as a fact that is a survival of parts of our ancestry like the brachial cleft, signs of a kind of fissure anatomy or vestigial tear. Is this similar to Jung's archetypes? Bion, I think he was probably talking about the same thing. Bion never really left the Tavistock lectures in 1937. As to considering Beckett and transformation, I think I tend to look at his struggle as more of a dynamic than static diagnosis. That he was struggling with being unborn. I think you've done some nice work in terms of opening that up. And I don't think it was a fixed position, but one he struggled with lifelong, which in a way, most of us struggle with some kind of thing like that. And so I think that, when you look at Jung's regression to the mother, it's really a way to go to a creative position and resource and then come back out again. It's a dynamic, cyclic process, never ending. I think somewhere, maybe through the work with Beyond, perhaps it's writing itself and being a creative sort, that he really illustrates the dynamic process that we learn in transformation, regression of the mother, return, and then re-emergence. And every now and then, like all of us, he gets stuck in the mother, but then eventually he finds some rebirth. So what I do like mostly about what you're saying here is you laid out Beckett more clearly than I've seen. So I really appreciate that. His unborn position. Thank you, Rick.
I appreciate that you are demonstrating that it's a cycle. Yeah, that's how life works, and that there's always going back to the mother to get something creative, and you go out again. Yeah, I appreciate that very much.